The majority viewpoint, for the most part, is that ethics is relative and subjective because it takes subjective beings to even come to ethical conclusions. Too much emphasis is put on relativism, using what amounts to subjective perception to mean relativistic evaluation. Yes, the subjective perceptual apparatus is necessary, but the amount of skepticism about the informational delivery of the senses is unfounded. In fact, not even worthy of mention except in outlier circumstances where situations are engineered just to prove exception to an unnecessary absolute. The foundation of ethics is real and objective and can be observed by one, can be observed by the many. What is seen can be evaluated in the moment by the senses reliably. What is known about history and precedent can be known reliably. Therefore, maximized outcomes can be planned objectively. Evidence can be compared, repeat outcomes can be considered. This first video, I'm just going to give the general definitions of subjective and objective and talk a little bit about how I view these concepts in relation to the foundation of ethics. Here's what Wikipedia says about objective. Something is objective if it is true outside of individuals' minds, their biases, perceptions, emotions, opinions, or imagination. If a claim is true even when considering it independently from the viewpoint of a sentient being, it is objectively true. Scientific objectivity refers to the ability to judge without partiality or external influence. Moral objectivity calls for moral or ethical codes to be compared to one another through a set of universal facts or a compared universal perspective, and not through differing conflicting perspectives. Wikipedia on subjective. Something is subjective if it is true only according to individuals' minds or conscious experiences, biases, perceptions, opinions, etc. If a claim is true exclusively when considering the claim from the viewpoint of a sentient being, it is subjectively true. For example, one person may consider the weather to be pleasantly warm, and another person may consider the same weather to be too hot. Both views are subjective. ChatGPT on objective. In philosophy, the term objective is used to refer to the existence of realities, truths, or values that are independent of individual perceptions, opinions, or beliefs. Philosophical objectivity implies that certain aspects of reality exist objectively, regardless of human subjectivity or perspectives. When something is considered objective in philosophy, it is thought to exist outside of the mind and to be universally valid or true. This contrasts with subjective aspects, which are dependent on individual experiences and interpretations. For instance, in ethics, an objective moral framework posits that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of cultural, societal, or personal beliefs. In metaphysics, objectivity might be related to the question of whether universals, such as numbers, properties, or abstract concepts, have an independent existence beyond the physical world or human cognition. It is essential to note that the nature of objectivity in philosophy has been the subject of extensive debate among various philosophical schools and thinkers. Philosophers have explored questions about the possibility of objective knowledge, the relationship between objectivity and subjectivity, and the ways in which human cognition might influence our understanding of objective reality. The pursuit of objectivity remains an ongoing and significant topic within philosophical discourse. Subjective by ChatGPT. In philosophy, the term subjective refers to aspects of reality that are influenced by individual perceptions, beliefs, feelings, or opinions. Subjectivity contrasts with objectivity, which denotes aspects of reality that are independent of individual subjectivity and exist objectively. When something is considered subjective in philosophy, it means that its existence or truth value is contingent upon the perspectives or experiences of the subject. This implies that different individuals or groups may have varying subjective experiences or interpretations of the same thing. In various philosophical contexts, subjectivity can be observed. Epistemology. In the theory of knowledge, subjectivity relates to how individuals' minds apprehend and interpret information. Different people may have subjective experiences and interpretations of the same events or data. Aesthetics. In discussions of art and beauty, subjective judgments play a significant role. Aesthetic preferences, tastes, and emotional responses to artworks can vary widely among individuals, making aesthetics a subjective domain. Ethics. In ethics, subjective moral relativism posits that moral values and principles are relative to individual beliefs, cultural norms, or personal preferences, rather than being universally objective. Perception of reality. Philosophical questions about the nature of reality and the mind-body problem often involve discussions of subjective experiences and how they relate to the external world. Personal identity. The concept of personal identity involves subjective experiences of self-awareness and continuity of consciousness over time. Philosophers continue to explore the interplay between subjectivity and objectivity, seeking to understand how these concepts influence our perception of reality and the nature of human knowledge. So my working definitions are, for objective, Any verifiable truth that happens outside a sentient being or does not rely on an individual's particular point of view to validate it. For subjective, any claim that requires or relies on the perception of a sentient being to validate it is foundationally subjective. Example, the perception of color. There cannot even be claims of truth without subjective perception. So even the notion of objectivity requires subjective perception at a minimum. From there, tested methods can be used for verification. Subjective perception does not equal individual opinion, even though your senses lie sometimes. Don't throw out the information you have because of exceptions to a rule. The majority of the time, sensory evaluation is objective enough and not inherently suspicious. We're surrounded by evidence that proves that the senses can be trusted, and subjective does not immediately mean individual or relative. The human body encompasses all the compiled qualitative distinctions of the subject-object scale. For all intents and purposes, the body is an animated object. The human form contains a chain of physical determinism that moves from absolute physical determinism, meaning elements that formed over billions of years but haven't been changed by their incorporation into the human body, all the way up to the perceived consciousness of mind. To some, the mind frees itself from the deterministic contingencies of physics and evolution. Others think we never free ourselves completely from it, or that we are completely trapped by it with only the illusion of freedom. Here's my view of it. A human being is the apex exhibition of the cold deterministic processes of the universe, the deterministic processes of evolution, and an emergent intellectual excess that climbs a mountain of shifting deterministic friction and reaches its hands out for the stars, dreaming of a pure idea, but never achieves it. Conscious life, including all life, represents an amazing emergence. At one extreme, it is represented by cold, rule-driven determinism, and at the other, a dream, really, of being free from it. Ethics cannot be separated from reality. Reality is relational. Ethics is contingent upon reality. If we want to change the foundation of ethics, then we need to change reality. We certainly do have the freedom to act against what is right. Life is complex. There's many situations in which an optimized outcome is impossible, or human intelligence too limited to effectively navigate an optimum outcome. This does not detach ethics from reality. This does not mean all options are equally valid or valued. Consequence can be evaluated. History is objective information that can be reviewed. We don't go into every situation starting over with no precedent and no knowledge of reality. We know, even in complex situations, what the outcomes likely will be. Given these realities, we have to take steps to qualitatively grade plans of action by the consequences of their perpetuation. In other words, ethics is not relative, and some ethics are superior to others. And we should be able to admit it and talk about the superiority of some points of view over others. The relativists have won too many battles they shouldn't have, causing loss of traction where traction is available and existential dread questioning when it's not necessary. Some points of view are superior and some inferior, and we should be able to talk about that given the evidence and make arguments. The arguments that we make are not somehow inherently equal simply because there's some amount of subjective input. Certainly, the more objective support, the better, but like I've said before, this is relational, not relative. So just to summarize, ethics is based on an objective foundation that can be observed and outcomes can be evaluated. This means principles and views can be graded as superior or inferior options after the moment has passed against a set goal. The goal should always be the greatest amount of good for the greatest number when dealing with the group. Sometimes that could mean propping up unfavorable conditions in the short term. But if this is the case, arguments can always be made and the evidence graded. Just remember, all points of view are not equally valid. Don't stop thinking about what you are doing and what the effects of what you do are on others, directly or indirectly.